we go. So everybody, welcome to Making the Familiar Strange. My name is Megan Griffiths. I am the Mission Advancement Coordinator here at Tri-Faith, and I'm going to be the presenter today. I don't normally present, but I just had this topic in mind and I needed a speaker, so I thought I would go for it. As always, our goals are to have just an interfaith dialogue, people from different faiths and backgrounds sharing different experiences. It's an opportunity for people of any background, religious or non-religious, to share meaningful experiences from their traditions. It can be holidays, religious practices, shared stories, or new stories, really anything that's meaningful to them that they'd like to talk about. And it's just to encourage perspective taking by looking at familiar things from new points of view. Ground rules, as always, are to be respectful, to challenge your own assumptions, to speak from your own point of view, and to be open to a new perspective. And just some upcoming events at Tri-Faith. This Thursday, we're doing our monthly Coffee on the Commons. And if the weather permits, we're going to have students from Catlin Elementary, which is just next door, come over and play violin. So it'll be 30 third graders playing the violin, and they did that last year. And it was very sweet. And so that'll be a fun little part of the day. And otherwise, it's just casual coffee hour. There's a Women of Tri-Faith lunch on Monday, May 13th at noon, and feel free to join that as you're able, and it's on Zoom. And then our May Making the Familiar Strange, April Klingmeyer is going to be an intern here at Tri-Faith, and she was going to talk about the subconscious. She hadn't gotten a specific title yet, but she said they're examining the subconscious as an area of interest for her. So that will be May 21st at noon on Zoom, just like this. So the Bronze Serpent. Why am I talking about the Bronze Serpent? So maybe about a month or so ago at church, I'm from a Christian tradition, and the gospel reading was the reading from the book of John, the Gospel of John, about Jesus compares himself to this bronze serpent. And it just got me thinking about that and the bronze serpent, which I know is referenced in the book of Numbers. And then one day I was at a traffic light and I saw a bumper sticker for some medical organization, and it had the little rod with the snake on it. And I was just like, what? I need to know more about this. Let's take a deep dive. And then I thought, well, why don't I do that for Making the Familiar Strange? So this is just my curiosity that I decided to go down a rabbit hole. So I'll go back to the image. So the image here, you see Moses and then the snake on a pole. So what happened? What is this about? So in Numbers, would anybody like to read this for me? Otherwise, I can just read it. So this is Numbers chapter 21, verses 4-9. From Mount Hor, they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, but the people became discouraged on the way. The people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord to take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." So Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it upon a pole, and whenever a serpent bit someone, that person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. So that's the story of where it came from. So this is a story where, once again, the Israelites are impatient. That happens a lot, 40 years in the wilderness. I don't blame them particularly. But they speak against God and against Moses. So God sends these fiery serpents. In this translation, it said poisonous. Other ones say fiery as punishment. And the people ask Moses to intercede on their behalf. So God instructs Moses to make this serpent on a pole, and whoever looks at it will be healed. This story goes back to approximately 1410 BCE. It's also referenced in the Book of Mormon, just another religious tradition that it's referenced in. Oops. And then later on in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 18, 1-4, we have, in the 3rd year of King Hosea, son of Elah of Israel, Hezekiah, son of King Ahaz of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the pillars, and cut down the sacred pole. He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. So this is as King Hezekiah has become king of Judah, and he's righteous after many years kings that weren't necessarily following the word of God. So Hezekiah implements this iconoclastic reform, and he tears down different elements in the different these high places, these little shrines that are around the countryside. And one of them includes the serpent that's based, I don't know if it's supposed to be exactly the same serpent that Moses, the Israelites had in the wilderness, or it's just another example of it, but the people are coming to it still, seeking it out for cures. People are starting to burn incense to it. The name Nehushtan means kind of like a bronze thing. It's also related to the word serpent. Serpent is also related to the word seraph, which is plural seraphim. So this burning serpent thing are all tied in with the idea of the seraphim sent by God, these messengers, which I just found interesting. That was just a interesting fact. I don't speak Hebrew and I am not a linguist. So if anybody else has more that they want to jump in on that part of it. And then we get to the Gospel of John in the New Testament, in John 3:11 through 15. And Jesus says, "Very truly, I tell you, we speak of what we know and testify to what we have seen, yet you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you about earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life." This is the part where Jesus is speaking with Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee. So he was already like a learned man. But they're having this conversation. Nicodemus is somebody who's sort of curious about Jesus, is sort of a follower, but hasn't really come out publicly. So they meet. I think it says somewhere they meet at night. So they're having this conversation, and Jesus is very cryptic. This is also right before the famous John 3:16, whoever believes in him. For God so loved the world that whoever believes in him shall not perish and have everlasting life. So right before that is this weird thing to the serpent. So you can see the similarities. This is just an image I found online. Making the comparison, the bronze serpent and the cross are both a source of healing and salvation. And it's one where the sin has become the cure. So just as these snakes were biting people, then they take this image of the snake and put it high for people to look at. So the sin of the crucifixion becomes this idea of salvation and Jesus atoning for our sins, or whatever different atonement theories are out there. But then turning to God becomes the source of salvation. Turning to Christ and belief in Christ becomes a source of salvation. So the sin and the cure, and that comes up a little later as well. And then just going back to other places that snakes and serpents are mentioned in the Bible. This is not related to the bronze serpent. But we have Genesis 3. Oh, somebody just entered. So Genesis 3:1 through 7. This is the Garden of Eden, just for context. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Both the eyes of both were opened and they knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. And then we have, oops, I'm trying to get my out of the way so I can read. Genesis 3:13 through 15. So this is after God has discovered Adam and Eve ate of the fruit. It says, the Lord God said to the woman, "What is it that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent tricked me and I ate." The Lord said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and the dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, and I will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." So here we've got this idea of the crafty serpent, which comes up in other cultures. The serpent tempts Eve to eat the fruit. Interesting that in the Genesis story, Satan and the snake the serpent is not identified with Satan. That doesn't happen until Revelation in the New Testament. But the snake is cursed by God, and it puts this tension between the snake and humans. And then in Exodus, another form of the snake shows up. These stories are both told in Exodus, in the Hebrew Bible, and in the Quran. So in Exodus 4, when Moses sees the burning bush, and he goes and talks to it, and God is speaking to Moses through the bush. Then Moses answered, "But look, they may not believe me or listen to me, but say the Lord did not appear to you." The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A staff." And he said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake, and Moses drew back from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out your hand and seize it by the tail." So he reached out his hand and grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand, so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. And then this story also shows in the Quran, in chapter 21, 17 through 21. Allah added, "And what is it that your right hand, O Moses?" He replied, "It is my staff. I lean on it, and with it I beat down branches for my sheep and have other uses for it." Allah said, "Throw it down, O Moses." So he did. Then behold, it became a serpent slithering. Allah said, "Take it and have no fear. We will return it to its former state." And then again, this shows up when Moses and Aaron are before Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a wonder,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.'" So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and they became snakes, but Aaron's staff swallowed up theirs. However, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So then the same story appears in the Quran, in chapter 7, verses 106 to 110. Or sorry, it should be 117. So Pharaoh said, "If you have come with a sign, then bring it if what you say is true." So Moses threw down his staff, and behold, it became a real snake. Then he drew his hand out of his collar, and it was shining white for all to see. The chief of Pharaoh's people said, "He is indeed a skilled magician who seeks to drive you from your land." So Pharaoh asked, "What do you propose?" They replied, "Let him and his brother wait and send mobilizers to all cities to bring you every clever magician." And the magicians came to Pharaoh saying, "Shall we receive a suitable reward if we prevail?" He replied, "Yes, and you will certainly be among those closest to me." They asked, "Oh, Moses, will you cast, or shall we be first to cast?" Moses said, "You first." So when they did, they deceived the eyes of the people and stunned them and made a great display of magic. When we inspired Moses, "Throw down your staff," and behold, it devoured the objects of their illusion. So here in these shared stories, we get God demonstrating his power through this image of a snake, first before Moses and then before Pharaoh. And then depending on which version of the story, in the Hebrew Bible, it's specifically Aaron's staff that gets turned into a snake in front of Pharaoh and his magicians, and it eats the magicians' staffs. Though here in this comic book, it says it's Moses's staff, but that's all right. And we get that this is the proof that God of the Israelites is the one true God. So his snake is more real. It's able to eat the other snakes. So again, we're showing God's power through this imagery of the snake. So then we get to completely outside of our sacred scriptures, we get to the rod of Asclepius. And this is what I saw on somebody's bumper sticker that day that I was at a red light and got me thinking. So Asclepius is the Greek god of healing and medicine. And so when doctors, if you've ever been to a coat ceremony, I think it's called a coat ceremony, basically where doctors take their Hippocratic oath, to this day, they still say, I swear by Apollo the healer and by Asclepius, and on and on and on. So this was used from the 6th century BCE onwards. So Moses' story does predate the Greek use, but this just shows it's unclear whether or not some of these stories are directly related, or it's just kind of more of the stories that were shared in Mediterranean cultures. But I did find it interesting that the Moses story predates this. So this called the Star of Life, which has the star with the rod of Asclepius, and then you have the World Health Organization, which also has that the same rod of Asclepius. And the Star of Life is used for emergency medical professionals. So the snake has several meanings. It's this idea of secret knowledge, as in the Genesis story, he's crafty. The shedding of skin in these ancient cultures was seen as a renewal and this idea of everlasting life. You also get this idea of help and harm, because the venom, if you were bitten by a snake and you could be sick or die, but then they also used medicine if you drank it, venom as medicine. Whether or not it was effective, it wouldn't hurt you in the same way that it being injected. And even this help and harm, the word pharmakon in Greek describes both medicine and poison, which I found interesting. And then one of the resources I was looking at talked about how even medicine itself is both a healing and a harm, because it's not only like if you take too much of it, can it make you sick, but this idea that in order for it to heal you, it has to do harm to whatever's making you sick. So it's either driving out poison, or of course, this is before the germ theory of medicine, but in our world, we think of it like it's killing the bacteria or the virus in order to heal you. So I found that really interesting. And then the rod of the rod of Asclepius also has to do with resurrection and healing, because without the support of a staff, we could stumble into death or injury. And it also could represent just itinerant physicians that would travel around healing people. Another interesting thing I thought I read about and it got me thinking too is there would be temples to Asclepius, and they would sort of be a temple and a place for healing. Kind of almost sounded like a modern day spa. But they had, or maybe like a sanatorium, they would have these rat snakes that would just be slithering around. And that made me think too of this idea of if these snakes are eating rats and mice, and how, things like the bubonic plague were spread by fleas that were on rats and mice, and how having those snakes around would have been, whether or not they knew it, the connection would have cut down on the spread of disease. So that was just an interesting connection there. So then we have the caduceus. The caduceus and the rod of Asclepius are often confused, but they are not the same thing. The caduceus is a winged rod with the two snakes intertwined. It's a symbol of Hermes or Mercury, who was the messenger of gods. He was also the god of commerce. He was also the conductor of the dead to the underworld, so not something you necessarily want to be associated with health and well-being. But it was the symbol, it became associated with medicine because it was the symbol of the Army Medical Corps, starting in 1902. And reading about that, it appears it was either adopted out of confusion because they got it confused with the rod of Asclepius, or it was a reference to swiftness and speed that the Army Medical Corps would need in order to help on the battlefield. So there's still a lot of contention between these two symbols. One source talked about how more commercial medical companies will use this caduceus, whereas like more healthcare oriented things will use the rod of Asclepius. But people can get very upset, it seems, if you confuse the two. So then just snakes in general, there's this dual nature. I thought this snake was kind of cute. So going back to ancient Egypt, it's a symbol of resurrection, eternity, and protection. It was a symbol of Wadjet, who was the protector of Egypt. And that's why it appears on like the pharaoh's crowns in ancient Egypt. And so there's this idea that that might have been passed on to the Israelites during their time, this idea of the symbolism of a snake being resurrection and eternity. You know, we have health and healing. We also have this tempter in the garden. In the book of Revelation, you get this dragon serpent and the direct association with the devil or Satan. And then even in Isaiah 11, chapter 11, verse 8, is where you get the peaceful kingdom verses, and like the lion shall lie with the lamb. And it specifically talks about a child being able to play over the adder's den, or being able to put their hand over the asp. I should have written that down. So I just found it very interesting, these ideas, this dual nature of snakes and the serpent, and how that all comes into play with this imagery in the Hebrew Bible, how it comes into the New Testament, how we're seeing it that's still being used today. So does anybody have any questions? Any discussion you want to talk about? That was pretty fast. It's not even 12:30. So yeah, so if you have anything you would like to discuss, questions for me. I'm not an expert on this, so. Oh, Everett, I can't hear you if you're muted.
I said I never heard it connected to eternity before, and can you explain that a little bit? How it's
Yeah,
connected?
so this idea of a snake shedding its skin, it's like renewal, and it keeps growing and being renewed. There's also the ancient symbol of a snake eating its own tail called the Ouroboros, and that's a
Yeah.
symbol of eternity as well.
Oh, okay. Because it's round. I get it.
Mhm.
Ouroboros.
Yep.
I just did a sermon on this a while back.
Nice.
It had this first.
Well, if you have any insights that you want to share.
No, you've covered most everything I covered.
Nice.
It is a very interesting topic.
Yeah. And then Charles
How
Peak.
do you say?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, when I use it, I said caduceus, but you say caduceus.
Yeah, I think there's different spellings of it as well.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there's, especially in the rod of Asclepius, there are multiple spellings for Asclepius.
Okay.
So yeah. So Mr. Peak said, seems to suggest facing our fears and the idea that nothing is harmful or healing, but can be both. Yeah, it's a very good point. And I like the idea of like facing our fears, and sometimes once you the idea of what doesn't kill us makes us stronger is very much in play. The other thing that was mentioned in some of the sources I was looking at was the idea that in the numbers, like that the people wouldn't look, there's some people that wouldn't even look at the snake to be healed, and how stubborn we all are, and that it was like too simple of a thing. And that comes up later. I don't remember, I should have looked it up. There were the king or somebody who had a skin condition, and the prophet told him, go bathe in the river 7 times. And he's like, that's too easy. Like, I need a bigger challenge. And it's like, no, just doing the easy thing that God tells you to do. And how many of us don't do the simple thing that needs to be done?
That's the truth.
Yeah. It's human nature.
Yeah, I used to have a man in Sunday school that say, "So what's changed?" And I said, "Human nature will never change."
We're all the same.
So anyway,
There's another spot in within Christian scriptural background in the deuterocanonical books
Hmm.
that I think it's in Wisdom of Solomon that connects the snake in the garden with Satan and source of evil there. So that does occur earlier than
Yeah.
the book of Revelation
Yeah, thank you.
with that. With Asclepius and the Asclepion, the sanctuaries of Asclepius.
Yeah.
Another feature of that, in addition to snakes being present within the Asclepion itself, person who was sick would sleep overnight in the Asclepion, and the cure was often provided by a dream of a serpent, in which the serpent would indicate whatever medicinal or activity things were necessary for healing the particular disease or condition of the person who was seeking physical health as well.
So the snake becomes the doctor.
Yes, very much so.
That's amazing. I didn't get a chance to read it because I just ran out of time. But there's a book called The Good and Evil Serpent by James Charlesworth. I'll share that book title here in the chat.
Charlesworth's a good scholar.
Yeah, Jeremy had the book and it's like, 400 pages. And I was just like, I'm not going to have time to read that. I would love to have time to read that.
Good and Evil Serpent. Is it by James Harriet?
What was that?
Is it by James Harriet?
No, it's by James Charlesworth. I just put it in the chat if you see that.
Oh, okay. Do you know a lot about the Quran?
I do not.
Okay.
But I was interested in that last line from the last section of the Quran, but the objects of their illusion, which would suggest oftentimes imagined fears. The fears before there's anything to be afraid of, and having to dispel that illusion.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, this weekend at Film Streams, they're showing Prince of Egypt. So I'm taking my daughter to see that, and all this will come in because they have Moses putting down his staff and turning into a snake and eating the other guy's snakes, which I remember seeing that movie in the theater when it came out, and I didn't remember that was actually biblically accurate. I was just like, what? Hey, that's so. And then just went back and read Exodus and was like, oh, yeah, that actually. I thought it was Hollywoodizing the story, but no, that is in both. It's both the Old Testament and the Quran. So
it's always a good suspicion, though, to have it as a first.
Yes. Yep.
When I was preparing, I read that. I won't be able to bring up the word now. The people that dig for artifacts, archaeologists, huh?
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists have found proof that Joseph really lived, but they've never found proof about Moses.
Oh, interesting.
And so a lot of scholars just say he's a legend. I believe that he was real, but the bronze they made at that time wasn't true bronze we make today. It wasn't as hard because they made mixed different things with it, and it was a softer alloy, and I think it broke down, so they probably never would find it. The stuff they made in the desert. That's just my belief.
Yeah.
I tell my congregation anything up any part of the Bible is just a legend.
Well, does anybody know what is the case with snakes? Are most snakes benign?
Well, if they got their fangs, snakes like gardener snakes, they have their fangs at the back of their mouth to paralyze the prey before they swallow it.
Ah,
But rattlesnakes, cobras, theirs is at the front of the mouth,
yeah.
so they can jump and get you. And a cobra can bite you 9 to 10 times with one leap, and
Yeah,
they give you a lot of.
according to Google, only 10 to 15% of snakes are venomous.
Really?
Yeah, but and I read that they all have some venom, but
That might
it
be
has
true. Yeah, I wonder.
to do with the location of the fangs. You know, if you read, different scholars have different opinions on everything. It makes it hard to preach.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share a footnote on this, that like,
Yes.
because I was curious if anything like jumped out in a different way looking at the Hebrew, and
Yeah.
um
Please do.
I'm just well, it's I don't have any insights on that because unfortunately I'm like looking at the Hebrew, I can't tell you, I don't know it well enough, but it does say that like there's a footnote that says that copper serpents have been found at various excavations,
Oh,
and that this incident took place near Punon, Punon, an important copper mine in antiquity.
okay.
Nice.
Um,
So maybe you
But-
found the clue to find Moses.
I know. Well, and kind of like it makes me want to go down another rabbit hole, obviously. Trying to find more. I mean, it's really nice because it did also reference that like the mounted serpent became idolized by the people and therefore was destroyed, and that was that quote that you shared from Second Kings.
Yeah, I've known that they destroyed it because they feared it becoming an idol.
Mhm.
Yeah,
They
and
thought
that
it
like
could solve all their problems.
and some scholars consider this wilderness story to be etiological, meaning that it's like designed to explain the origin of the leader serpent cult in Israel.
Right. Mhm.
So that just seemed interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like
It is.
it's already there. It's already like a cultural phenomenon. Yeah, they often have these stories that look back to explain things. So
There are people, that think Genesis is just a legend too. I had one person ask me one Sunday, do I believe in Big Bang theory? I said, I believe in that, but I think God made the Big Bang happen.
yeah.
So
Yeah, they just had Creighton just had a conference on the intersection of science and religion, and their keynote speaker was a priest who studies cosmology, and that's sort of he goes through all these. It was very scholarly, and he was talking about multiverses and things, but talked about how there are things within the universe that are so precise.
Yeah.
And basically the Catholic teaching would be that like evolution, all of those things are correct, and it's just that's one of the ways God does creation. So they're not basically the teaching, a lot of religious teachings is that they're not mutually exclusive. So
Yeah. I
which is
told my
ascribed to.
same thing, that everything out there is too precise and too accurate, so they're not all crashing into each other. So
Mhm.
but it didn't just happen.
Yeah.
That it was created by God. I don't know. I like to be telling them the right thing, but
Yeah.
Well, it's been very interesting. I appreciate you sending me.
Yeah,
Invite.
thanks for the time.